I recall the story of the recovery of the Battlespire, as it was told to me by the son of old Khmer these many years ago.
But where are the legions to cleanse this realm of its infestation?
At this stage, humble groveling is customary, accompanied by a handsome gift.
I enjoy a challenge and a good workout, but more stimulating exertions might satisfy us both.
I implore you. You must do the deed.
Bastard! You tricked her into this to serve your own selfish ends.
Once again, you exceed our expectations. We did not expect you to find JCL.
Of course. You'll be wanting my armor of the Savior's hide.
I am the huntsman. I hunt you in accordance with the laws of the wild hunt. Tremble before your death.
You overestimate the inconvenience you have caused me, and overvalue your status in negotiations with an immortal lord.
This is unacceptable. This is but the calm before the storm.
We are prepared to grant you what you ask in return for your service.
Thank you for coming. I regret the disturbance you've caused, though in your place, I might have thought it excusable.
No mortal weapon ever forged has the power to sever my anchor to this realm.
An Elder Scrolls Legend Battlespire is my pick for the biggest surprise in the series. It is, by most accounts,
even if you do have the perfect build, there's still a good chance that you're not going to survive the dungeon because, again, it's just so punishingly difficult. And unlike what some of the proponents of the game will tell you, it's not in a fun way. It's in a you have to exploit the game and exploit the really bad AI to actually survive kind of way.
Let me put it this way. I have no desire to ever play Battlespire again after doing so for this review. Grab it on GOG if you really want to give it a shot, just manage your expectations first. An Elder Scrolls legend indeed, but a legend for all the wrong reasons.
Okay, that's the end of Battlespire. It was an interesting game to go back and see. Is it fun? If you like a challenge, then I imagine there's some redeeming qualities, I guess. Otherwise, I did not really enjoy that at all, I'll be honest. I wasn't a big fan. Not my thing. Completely not my thing. I feel like that skeleton right now.
not very good. Earlier this year, I streamed a blind playthrough of the game myself, and my takeaway might surprise you, but I actually really liked it. It sounds insane, I know. I don't want to downplay the game's flaws too much, nor do I want to try and pretend it'll appeal to everybody. But I did think it would be fun to go through the game again and try to articulate to myself and you guys exactly why it is that I like this game. Look, I'm not under any illusion I'm going to convince anybody to part with the $6 necessary to purchase this game on Steam or GOG. It's hard enough to get people to try Arena or Daggerfall for more than a few minutes, and those games are free and arguably much more accessible. From everything I've seen, Battlespire is less popular than even Redguard. That's saying something, since that game is a complete departure from most things we associate with the Elder Scrolls, being an action-adventure rather than an action RPG. It's also a topic for another day, so we'll set that aside for now. Let's talk history a little bit. If you've ever looked into this game before, watched videos or reviews or anything of the sort, you're probably aware of a few key things. Firstly, Battlespire was initially developed as an expansion to Daggerfall. It took Daggerfall's dungeon crawling and turned it into the entire game. That leads us to our second key fact. This game is not an open world. Now, initially being developed as an expansion to one of the largest open world games ever created, this might come as a big surprise. If you came into the game expecting a more classic Elder Scrolls like Arena and Daggerfall, you would be sorely disappointed, as many contemporary reviews were. The physical game apparently came with a letter from Bethesda that basically confirms that this was supposed to tide players over until Morrowind's release, which was slated for late 1998 at the time. The highest review this game got, according to Wikipedia, is a 75 out of 100 from a PC Zone review in 2001, but most were much lower. For reference, reference, Arena and Daggerfall, the games predating Battlespire, scored around the 80s and 90s with most publications. Battlespire's poor reviews are the last major thing you likely know if you've looked into this game. These reviews cite a few major things, primarily technical and performance issues, things like clipping into scenery or errors occurring during dialogue. There were, of course, also complaints about graphical fidelity, and the game not really looking up to snuff, even for its time. Part of this seems to be because Bethesda reneged on plans to use 3DFX due to compatibility issues between X-Engine and various 3D graphics cards. In that 2001 article from PC Zone, Chris Anderson criticizes this decision. It's not a bad game engine by anyone's standards, but it's hardly revolutionary and indeed looks positively antiquated alongside the likes of Quake 2 or even Jedi Knight. What this all amounts to is a game with tacky environments and almost laughable sprites that will remind you of a number of old titles you'd probably rather forget. Bethesda would no doubt argue at this point that you don't need lush terrain and 3D polygon characters to make a great game. After all, it's gameplay that counts at the end of the day. Oh really? It had better be bloody good then. So, critical reception wasn't the best, but did it at least sell well? No. In fact, after Battlespire and Redguard, Bethesda was in dire financial straits and would only be saved after Morrowind's release in 2002. Battlespire is considered a critical and commercial failure, and I think that's a tragedy. So contemporary critics didn't like the game, so what? That's not terribly uncommon with ahead-of-their-time masterpieces, right? Sometimes a legitimately good game simply never finds its audience, and it sits forgotten in a corner somewhere until the right group comes along. I'll be the first to tell you that's probably not the case here. The game is currently 27 years old, and while it's sometimes referred to as forgotten, it's more likely that the kind of person it appeals to is just not very common, especially in 2025. A common theme I notice when people discuss this game is that a lot of them really do not like Daggerfall's dice roll combat or dungeon crawling. Typically, they will attribute Daggerfall and Arena's success more to their world building and the stories they tell. Now, maybe I'm an odd duck here, but I legitimately really enjoy the combat and dungeon crawling of early Elder Scrolls and early RPGs in general. Another thing I know is unpopular is the size and complexity of Daggerfall's many dungeons. This one I think doesn't even need any explanation. Even Daggerfall Unity includes an option to make them much, much smaller. This is another aspect that again appeals more specifically to me. One of my earlier videos is about my experience playing The Bard's Tale. I'm not going to ask everybody to go watch it, but if you're unfamiliar with that game, just know these things. Your objectives are vague. Even finding the very first dungeon took me several hours. Then, once you've found the dungeon, you have to manually map it out while dealing with random encounters, traps, and multiple puzzles that will reset upon your leaving the dungeon. Oh, and it's totally dark unless you bring a lantern or spell to illuminate it. All this is to say that long, difficult, old-school dungeon dives are something that I enjoy. The last main thing that appeals to me is actually something I think is relatively popular. Battlespire has some of the best dialogue in the series. The scamps are suitably impish.
Ooh, mean man can scamp afraid. Drop weapons so scamp feels safe.
The Dremora are arrogant and don't sound like their voices have been put through a deep fry filter.
Gods and garters, another mortal here wandering around unsupervised on my watch.
The different Daedra have different personalities, and there are many branching dialogue options that are all voiced.
I enjoy a challenge and a good workout, but more stimulating exertions might satisfy us both.
An Elder Scrolls Legend, Battlespire, is a very particular kind of experience, and I found myself comparing it more closely to games like System Shock than its Elder Scrolls brethren. During my streams of this game, I was asked if I thought this game would have been good as an expansion to Daggerfall, and I have to say no. I think this game is better as its own experience. One of the big draws with Daggerfall is having the ability to do whatever you want at basically any point. Your only real limitations are during the quests Morgaia's Wedding, the Beast, the Emperor's Courier, and Totem Totem Who Gets the Totem. This is because those are the only main story quests that are timed, and thus can be failed. All others can be put off indefinitely if you so desire, and all other quests can be failed as much as you want without impacting your ability to complete the game. If Battlespire were to exist within the game of Daggerfall, it would end up clashing in more than one way with the rest of the game. For one, Daggerfall's dungeons do not require you to complete them in any meaningful way. You're there for one quest objective, either to find a MacGuffin or kill something. Battlespire, contrariwise, asks a lot more from you in terms of overall completion. Odds are you're going to have to explore every level fairly thoroughly to find your multiple objectives to complete each floor. In addition to this, in Daggerfall, you can decide, fuck it, I'm going home. The setting and story of Battlespire would kind of be at odds with that, since you're pretty much forced into completing it before you can return to the normal game afterwards. Like Dead Money in Fallout New Vegas. But that's enough preamble for now. In short, Battlespire is an unpopular game that takes what some perceive to be the worst parts of its predecessors and makes that its entire focus. These parts are things that I personally happen to enjoy, which makes the game tailor-made to my particular set of interests. These, in combination with the game's voice acting, characters, and story, make it my pick for the most underappreciated game in the Elder Scrolls franchise. I've watched and read many reviews at this point, and I feel like the only person in the world who actually enjoyed my time playing this game. Today I want to go through and see if I can't explain what it is that draws me to the Battlespire. We're going to start with character creation before we get into any of the lore or story stuff that happens. I do plan to explain the events of Battlespire as they transpire, but I don't anticipate this being a very lore or story-focused video overall. Strap in, there's a lot to talk about. Character creation is one of the few things I've seen Daggerfall almost universally praised for. And for good reason. It is extraordinarily in-depth and very flexible. Breaking the game completely and making it super easy isn't that difficult with just a little bit of know-how. This is important to understand because Battlespire's character creation is extremely similar, perhaps unsurprisingly given that whole developed as an expansion thing. First, you can choose one of up to 6 different races: Redguards, Bretons, Nords, High Elves, Dark Elves, and Wood Elves. The Beast races, like Khajiit, Argonians, Orcs, and Imperials, are not selectable. The game tells you what kinds of bonuses you get for choosing different races, but those bonuses will likely mean nothing to you if you haven't played through the game at least once before. After selecting our race, we get the option to choose a class or make a custom one. Choosing a class will show you the class creation screen, and even allow you to make adjustments to it to fine-tune it to your tastes. Alternatively, we can create a class from whole cloth. I'm going to do this for the purpose of talking about it more. If you're familiar with Daggerfall, then the biggest change is just the presentation of this whole thing. Instead of choosing 7 advantages and/or disadvantages, you're given a set of points. Things that will make your character stronger will cost points. Things that will make your character weaker will give back some. Simple enough to understand, right? There's a lot of different things you can spend points on. Attributes and skills, which we'll go over more in depth in a bit, elemental resistances and weaknesses, forbidden materials, weapons and armor. Finally, you have these checkboxes for different advantages. Some of these might sound familiar to you from, you guessed it, Daggerfall. Acute hearing, adrenaline rush, these are all the names of advantages that exist in Daggerfall as well. Now, if you're savvy, you'll be able to tell me the difference between regenerate and rapid healing in Daggerfall. Time's up. The difference is that regenerate health restores a number of hit points every so many rounds. Rapid healing, by contrast, would increase the amount of health restored specifically while resting. Now, this is important to understand because resting, as it exists exists in the mainline games does not exist in Battlespire. So what then does rapid healing actually do? Rapid healing increases the effects of healing items and spells. Other than this, the advantages are mostly the same as they were in Daggerfall. Acute hearing is still not very good, Adrenaline Rush gives you bonus damage and chance to hit when near death, Regenerate Health restores hit points every so many rounds, Athleticism seems to increase your jump distance and movement speed, Increased Magery makes your spell point pool equivalent to some multiple of your intelligence, Spell Absorption has been slightly nerfed as Battlespire has gotten rid of our ability to cannibalize our magic. It only works on enemy spells now, meaning we can damage ourselves with our own spells, unlike in Arena and Daggerfall. But wait a second, what's this? Regenerate spell points exists as an advantage, but no regen of spell points exists as a disadvantage? What's the deal with that? If you don't have either, are you regaining spell points? And the answer is no. You don't regenerate spell points passively in this game without the advantage. No regen of spell points actually stops you from regaining them from certain magical effects as well. Things like items enchanted with Magica Restartus do not work. The rest of this page should be fairly understandable. Forbidden Armor describes the heaviest armor you can wear, Forbidden Material the highest tier of equipment, ranging from iron all the way up to Daedric. Forbidden Weapons show which weapons you're able to equip yourself with. The bottom half shows your elemental resistances and weaknesses. In order from most to least resistance is Immunity, Resistance, Low Tolerance, and Critical Weakness. So that covers all of our advantages and disadvantages. Guess what though? There's even more stuff to spend points on. Next, let's look at spells. That's right, you can add spells to your spellbook before you even start the game. I'm not going to go into literally every spell that exists, but here's the big one for you casters out there: cause damage. When we get into the levels proper, I'll discuss magic a bit more. For now, understand that cause damage is your Lightning Bolt, Burning Touch, and Localized Blizzard all in one. Other than that, I'd say you can pick pretty much anything that seems interesting or useful to you. Cure Health is always popular, and Teleport is almost identical to how it appeared in Daggerfall. This is the most reliable time to get any given spell, as most of the ones that the UESP notes exist are available right here, right now. If you don't choose a spell right now, there is no guarantee that you will actually get it in the dungeon. Finally, let's discuss equipment and magical items. We're covering them together because they are extremely similar. But remember, all of this still costs those points we talked about at the beginning. Equipment features a selection of mundane weapons and armor of varying qualities. The Magical Items tab features potions and enchanted items that will either have static effects or will produce the casting of many different spells. Alright, phew! With that, we can finally start talking about skills and attributes. If you're a big Elder Scrolls fan, you're probably familiar with the concept of attribute governance. In Morrowind and Oblivion, this meant that each skill was tied to an attribute, and improving those skills enough times would mean an improvement to the related attribute when you gained a character level. It's kind of a whole thing, and is part of the reason that people clowned on the original Oblivion's leveling system. In Daggerfall, this was a flavor thing. Whether a skill was governed by an attribute made no difference whatsoever. For example, the Destruction skill is governed by the Willpower attribute. In Morrowind and Oblivion, that means if you level Destruction, you can gain points in your Willpower attribute. In Daggerfall, this means nothing. In Battlespire, the attribute that governs a particular skill is extraordinarily important for one simple reason. A skill cannot exceed the attribute it is tied to. If your strength is 60, then your axe, blunt weapon, hand-to-hand, and long blade are all capped at a maximum skill level of 60. Luckily, skills tell you what attribute they are governed by, so there's no ambiguity or guesswork as to what you need to improve. Now, for some builds, this isn't a big deal. If you're using swords, for example, then you probably just want to have a bunch of strength anyways. If you're using a bow and arrow, you're probably fine putting points into your agility. This primarily causes problems for magic builds, who suddenly need to diversify their attributes attributes quite a bit. Intelligence is still necessary for high spell points, but willpower will gate your destruction, and personality will gate your restoration. But even mages want some strength for inventory space at the very least. Not to mention hand-to-hand or perhaps a backup weapon if you run out of spell points. Personally, I think this is fine. Magic in Daggerfall was incredibly broken. Using anything else looks like a challenge run by comparison, and Daggerfall was already pretty easy once you understand how to level up and how the main story quests are structured. It's fun to be overpowered, obviously, but some nerfs to magic hardly kills it as a playstyle. Attributes being so much more important in this game than they were in Daggerfall begs the question then, what exactly does each of them do? And here's where I rip the band-aid off. Most of them are just not that good. Strength and intelligence are the most obviously useful. The former increases carrying capacity and damage dealt with attacks. The latter increases spell points. Willpower supposedly increases your ability to resist spells, but by how much is a mystery, and the elemental resistance advantages are much stronger anyway. Agility is similar, and is supposed to improve your chance of hitting enemies or dodging enemy attacks, but the magnitude of this effect seems negligible, especially at higher skill levels. I suspect this stat also has something to do with how often weapons will be knocked from your hands, but I don't have anything concrete on that front. Endurance says it directly affects the character's health and stamina, but there's no fatigue in this game, and the health is determined by this wounds value. Yeah, we'll get to it. What this means is that the only thing endurance will noticeably affect is how long your character can hold their breath. Speed, predictably, affects your character's movement speed. Luck is described as having a small effect on most actions the character performs, but its benefits are not readily apparent in-game. Finally, personality. Personality I skipped over initially because it says it affects people's reactions to your character, and this is somewhat of a big deal in Battlespire because you can speak with most enemies. Supposedly, your personality will have some impact on how these conversations play out. This can sometimes be useful, but it is far from a necessity. We'll discuss these conversations a bit more later on. So what conclusions should we draw from this little spiel about attributes? They're mostly unimportant. If you're not planning to use magic at all, then it's very easy. After your strength attribute, you can focus on getting whatever attributes are most important for the skills you plan to use. If you do plan to use magic, then you may need to make some concessions in attributes like luck or endurance to facilitate the extra need for attribute points. The individual benefits of each attribute are small. Strength is the only one I'd personally say is an absolute necessity for almost every build. Since our attribute distribution is going to be so based on what kinds of skills we want to use, then let's take a look. What skills can we pick? Way fewer than in Daggerfall. Battlespire only has a selection of 18 skills, in stark contrast to Daggerfall's 35. So what do we have to work with? There are the 6 weapon skills, the 6 magic skills, and finally are 6 of what I'll call auxiliary skills. These are the somewhat passive skills that aren't necessarily playstyle dependent. Of these 18 skills, you have to choose 12 for your class. You might notice a distinct lack of all the social skills that we've come to adore in our Elder Scrolls games. In addition to the 11 language skills, we lost climbing, running, medical, mercantile, pickpocketing, and lockpicking. I'm making a bit of an assumption here, but I'm pretty sure this is for 2 reasons. First and foremost, this game was developed as a massive dungeon dive. There are no shops, and thus no need for mercantile. Locked doors are locked by puzzles, so a lockpicking skill would either be totally useless or totally game-breaking. You can talk to a lot of enemies, but the only relevant language skill to this game would have been Daedric. There are a few situations where perhaps you could work in etiquette or streetwise, but are those skills worth transferring over because of 2 or 3 conversations in the whole game? Pickpocketing could arguably have been brought over, but in Daggerfall, the only thing you could get from pickpocketing is either a small amount of gold or an item that you're stealing off a shop's shelf. Climbing too could arguably have been brought, but I personally never missed it while playing, though this is helped by the dungeons being designed without the need for it. Medical was a skill that was only ever checked during resting, and since resting isn't a thing, it can't exist. Finally, running. Truth be told, I don't know why it was given its own skill in Daggerfall, so this being cut doesn't surprise me that much. Though, I suppose it lives on as athletics in Oblivion. The secondary reason for this, and this one I feel is a bit of a reach, is because of lore consideration. I haven't talked about the game's story yet, but we're playing as an apprentice battle mage trying to join the Imperial Guard. This, naturally, would lend itself more to those who have these combat-oriented skills, and less so to those merchants, thieves, and pacifists of the world. Sweet, so that's a quick overview of our skills, but how do we actually choose what we want to do? In Daggerfall, I usually base this off of what skills I want to use to level my character, but leveling up in Battlespire is quite different. Like Daggerfall, you can gain skill levels by using your skills. Casting destruction magic levels destruction. Hitting enemies with an axe will level your axe skill. You get it. In Daggerfall, if you level your skills enough, you will gain a character level. Not so in Battlespire. In Battlespire, your level is based on what level of the game you are playing. As you complete each mission, you will gain another level, and thus more of these points to spend. This means that a skill's place determines how quickly the skill itself can level. You can also spend points to level these skills here. Attributes and skills both have minimums of 10, but while attributes can go as high as 75, skills can only go to 60 before we enter the dungeon. Alright, let's look at wounds now. This is, without a doubt, the worst name for a health value I've ever seen. It goes from 50 to 200, and you cannot level it up once you start the game. If you're creating a new class, then it defaults to 50, which is the minimum value and lower than any of the game's base classes. Even the Sorcerer, the squishiest class, starts at 55. Daggerfall does something similar, but at least the game didn't make you squishier than the squishiest class they had. The amount of difference between 50 and 200 at level 1 is already huge, but by the time you're on the last level, the difference becomes astronomical. Alright, that's a hell of a lot of discussion about character creation. I think Battlespire's class creation is my favorite character creator in any game ever. This is probably because I'm biased and really like Daggerfall's system, which Battlespire's is obviously based on. It has some of the same flaws as Daggerfall's system, primarily some of the attributes being almost entirely useless, or some advantages and disadvantages that are slightly confusing. Ultimately, however, you can still make a character that is extremely strong even at level 1. I've seen a few people criticize this system by saying it's too easy to make an unplayably bad character, and I can see how that might happen, but I just don't relate. You might say that that's because the first time I played Battlespire, I already had a strong understanding of Daggerfall's character creation. I might be willing to entertain that idea, but I had heard the same criticism of Daggerfall when I first played that game. That game I also played blind, and obviously I fell in love with it. But still, this point has some merit, so here's my compromise. My brother, who knows nothing about Daggerfall or Battlespire's character creation system, made my class for me. I have a lot to say about builds, optimization, and difficulty in this game, but I'll save that for later. Alright, we've gone over pretty much everything that character creation has to offer us, and we're only 7 pages into the script. Here's my character sheet. There's one final step to class creation. When you make a new class, you can save it, and it'll show up in the existing class tab for you to reselect if you want to use it again. This alone makes me appreciate Battlespire's class creators so much. But enough about that, let's make our entrance to the Weregate. As we spawn into the first level, we're greeted with this giant pillar of light. the Weirgate itself. And before anything else, we need to talk about how this feels to play. It's bad. At first, anyway. The default controls are archaic and ill-suited for their purpose. So much so that I rebound almost every single key. To this game's credit, movement is defaulted to the view setting rather than cursor. That means that mouse look is the default, which is a huge improvement from Daggerfall. So now that that's sorted, let's fight a Dremora real quick. Again, the combat is very similar to how it worked in Daggerfall, but you might notice that this sounds a little weird. You might notice that sound, that's almost like heavy footsteps, doesn't actually match up with when the Dremora is taking steps. That's because that's not what it is. Every enemy has some kind of sound cue when they start their melee attacks, and they'll start an attack as soon as you're in range. This, however, forces them to stop for a split second. If you're still backing up, then you move out of their range, and force them to move again, making this sound cue play a lot more than it probably should. This is the first, and probably the most minor, of the technical issues that still plague this game. It should go without saying at this point, but the version of Battlespire you can buy right now from online retailers is not the 1.0 edition. Steam, Good Old Games, and the Microsoft Store all run at least version 1.5. Steam has an additional unnumbered patch that apparently adjusts the default resolution and scaler, though how exactly I haven't bothered looking into. Another bug I experienced killed me. I walked into this lip wrong and died for my arrogance. I can only guess that I must have gotten stuck between the geometry here. This is another issue that tends to crop up multiple times throughout this game, particularly in the platforming sections. So now that we've adjusted our controls so that they're designed for use by human hands, and we've covered some technical issues that have already cropped up, what is our actual objective? We are an apprentice battle mage, and have entered the Battlespire for what is basically our final exam. The first room has a corpse with some scamps standing around it. Approaching them will initiate dialogue.
Yeah? You what? How here? You Cade thing? We shall want Cade thing?
This line about Cade thing will make more sense in a bit. There's a few different ways we can go about this. I decided to intimidate some of these scamps into fighting each other. These kinds of conversations are what your personality attribute is supposed to impact. They don't always work, particularly with higher level enemies, but it's always fun to try. While they're doing that, we find 2 letters on the corpse. The first seems to be a tally of the people who entered the Battlespire. At the bottom of the page is our first clue. The Daedra Prince has forced entry. Battlespire has fallen. Well, that's kind of a bummer. Apparently they died defending some kinds of anchors. And now the only way out of here is through something called the Star Galley. One of the other people on this list is Josiah Cade. Now, this name and the related in-game dialogue changes based on the sex of your character. If you play as a male, the other apprentice is Vitasha Tranell. If you play as a female, the other apprentice is Josiah Cade. This other apprentice is actually the person who writes the other letter that we find on this body, and will provide helpful hints throughout the game. This is how a lot of the game's story and objectives are communicated to the player. Now, I know you Morrowind enjoyers aren't put off by a little reading, but if this is a big turnoff for any of you Oblivion appreciators or Skyrim respecters, then there's not much to be done about it. Josiah's letter mentions the gate home being blocked by something that hurts to touch. A lot. This is probably the first thing that kills a lot of people when they play this game for the first time. Touching the portal will damage you and knock you back, and if you're at any kind of an angle, then you're going to fall into the lava and die. Hope you saved, bozo, cause if not, it's back to character creation for you. Here's another technical issue, I guess. When you die, the game resets before you can load a save. This is a fun and interesting thing that will definitely not cause any major problems on level 5. I imagine this is a round where the average person who was only kinda curious about this game would have quit, whether they had saved or not. Your objective isn't really clear. The map is kinda confusing and the enemies are loud and annoying, on top of combat being a bit of a slogfest full of misses and the occasional critical miss that stops you from attacking again for a little bit. Or perhaps you want to get your weapon knocked from your hands. Oh, and your equipment is degrading awfully quick. That's actually probably the next big thing to mention. Weapon and armor degradation is a big deal in this game. For the moment, there's no way to repair armor or weapons, so you just have to accept that a lot of weapons are going to break. This is, without a doubt, stressful. Being left totally defenseless is a bit of a scary thought, especially when you have no idea if you'll get a replacement. You're basically at the whims of the random loot that enemies can drop for you. It does happen, too, that you become defenseless. As far as I know, there's no weighted drops that favor skills you've chosen. Weapons you've expressly forbidden will still drop even though they're totally useless to you. This is a good thing, and I'll elaborate on why later. In my experience, there are plenty of armor and weapons of all types to go around. It might be a bit rough in the very beginning, but by the end of this first floor, I had multiple backup weapons and a backup set of armor. So what exactly is our objective here? Well, our first objective is to find out what our first objective is. We don't have a formal quest log or anything like that. We're basically just going to have to explore this entire floor until we get some hints as to what we should be doing. The first extra note we find from Josiah talks about some sort of special charm or something that lets the enemies pass through the thing blocking the weregate. The thing he's talking about here are the sigils. The sigils are one of the common complaints you hear from people playing this game for the first time, and I can't really defend them. There are two kinds of sigils, regular ones and sigils of entry. They look identical to one another. The sigils of entry will allow you to pass through these normally painful gates. The regular ones will apparently improve your ability to speak with the Daedra that hold them, or they can be consumed for a short etherealness effect. You only need the one on this floor, and I picked up quite a few extras, so I don't think it's likely that you totally miss them all. If you're not in the habit of reading item names though, you might need to hunt around for some unlooted corpses and find one that will allow you entry to this bridge area. This bit of design is particularly egregious because simply changing the color of the regular sigils would have been enough to indicate that these are two different kinds of items. The sigils of entry will allow you to pass through the gates that share the same symbol as the sigil you're carrying. They're all based on different letters of the Daedric alphabet, and the only sigil of entry you can find on the first floor is called Dot. The weregate is blocked by a Hefhead sigil, which, spoiler warning, we won't be getting a sigil of entry for. That said, this is a recurring mechanic, so we're going to have to get used to finding these. Let's discuss magic a little bit more. Magic, as mentioned, received some pretty heavy nerfs from Daggerfall. You're not going to be flying around casting instant death at anything that happens to exist in your vicinity. That said, I actually still really like the flexibility that magic has in Battlespire. See, in the mainline games, when you learn a spell from either buying it, finding the relevant spellbook, or more likely making the spell yourself, its characteristics are set in stone. Its element, how many targets it can affect, its duration, all that. In Battlespire, this is a little bit different. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into literally every spell that exists or discuss the specifics of all of them, but let's at least cover cause damage. Spellcasting in Battlespire is really cool because you can change so much about the spells you cast. When you look at the spell in the spellbook, the first icon is only used for continuous effects, things like shield or spell absorption, so it's not relevant to cause damage specifically. The second icon determines your casting mode: on self, on touch, one target at range, area around self, and area at range. Same exact rules as Daggerfall's. The last one determines your element. These would be frost, fire, shock, poison, and magicka. The big thing here is that you can alter this on the fly. The spell's cost still adjusts based on how you intend to cast, but being able to switch from one to another makes this system pretty neat. These different modes work for a lot of spells. You might think it's strange to be able to target enemies with things like Cure Health and Fire Shield, but there is actually a point to it. I didn't talk at all about the multiplayer aspect of this game, but yeah, this game has multiplayer. It's possible to get it up and running, but I haven't actually bothered with it myself. The strength of most spells is determined by what floor you're on, so there's no need to worry about spell strength. Spell cost is determined by your skill with a given spell's related school, so a Master Destruction Wizard is going to spend fewer spell points on destruction spells. Honestly, the worst thing about about magic in this game is just how unwieldy it feels to try and keybind multiple spells. Your average player is probably only going to deal with cause damage and cure health, maybe cure poison, so this doesn't come up that often. You can only map spell hotkeys to the function keys, and only F1 through F8 at that. For most players, I'd imagine this is fine, but if you wanted to do more than just healing and damage fairly regularly, perhaps summoning monsters or confusing enemies, then you're going to have a little more trouble. Basically, anything that's not exactly the 8 spells you hotkeyed, you're going to need to open your spellbook and cast manually. A very cool system that I think could do with just a little bit of expansion and refinement. Oh, and illusion kinda sucks. It's literally just invisibility, and stealth is not a particularly strong playstyle in this game. Poor illusion school. At least apocalypse magic made you cool in Skyrim. As we continue exploring, another note from Josiah names one of the battle mages that is still alive, but notes, I haven't had time to look for any secret doors or anything. The note also tells us that Methats is in charge of the enemies, so we know to be on the lookout for a few different things. Stuff like this reminded me of playing The Bard's Tale, perhaps unsurprisingly. Trying to find out where to go or what to do using small hints like this is fun. Now, as I've been going around, I've been picking up these cogs, but as of yet, we don't know what the cogs are for. I mean, I do, obviously, but we haven't run into anything talking about them. That said, just the fact that they're A, not equipment, and B, not consumable, makes them oddities to find in the loot pool. In addition, they're called things like cog of flux capacitation, which should mean that they're important in some capacity. Eventually, we stumble upon a door that is labeled Star Galley Crib, no admittance. Now, the Star Galley we know is supposed to be our way out of here, but the door is locked. The obvious thing is this pedestal a few feet away that almost looks like the buttons we push to open similar doors in another room. This one, however, doesn't have a button on it. Activating the pedestal adds a cog to it. Repeated activations add more cogs, but the door still doesn't open. Reading the plaque brings up another name that's somewhat familiar. Apparently, we're not allowed to use this Star Galley Crib opening mechanism without the permission of one Clarentavius Vasilius. He's the one that Josiah mentioned was supposed to still be alive. That note is the same one that also mentioned that he hadn't looked for any secret rooms yet. Checking our map reveals that there's another room attached to this one. Yeah, okay, I'm sure you've put together that the man is in this secret room behind this filing cabinet. This is a strategy that works throughout the game. If you see a spot on the map that looks connected, it generally is.
No legions? Just you? And what use are you? Useless! Useless! All is lost! The Weir Gate is barred, and the Star Galley, that can only bear us deeper into the darkness and the madness. Well, that's the end then.
Clarentavius is distraught, to say the least. The man fully believes that there is no hope, and bids us loose the final anchor and destroy us all.
Sever the last anchor and we shall be done. You will reach them through a mystic conveyor, if you can get past Methats, that is.
The anchors he's talking about are these big blue energy things. We walked past a couple of them, but without understanding what they are, there was no point in touching them. Still, we can follow his instructions to his quarters and look at the plaque on the button. It's basically a big-ass warning sign saying, "Do not push this button." Basically, if all of these anchors are divided, everyone on Battlespire will die. If you actually follow through on doing this, you can get a game over. Or rather, you're supposed to be able to. I had to make a second character to get this to happen, but for some reason it just wouldn't work with the first one. Alright, it's fairly obvious that's not the intended objective. So what exactly are we doing on this level? First, we want all the cogs. There are 5 in total, each with different names and held by different enemies. If you somehow hadn't stumbled upon one before finding the room, then you can still learn there are 5 of them from a note in Clarentavius' quarters. This note is right next to a sack that has one of these cogs in it. If you ask him where the rest are...
As for the cogs, gone, lost, scattered into the hands of the enemy. It matters not. Make your peace with the great powers and sever the final anchor. Hope is lost. All that remains is an honorable death.
He'll tell you they've been scattered and not to bother with them because of the whole you know, despair thing. One of the enemies who has one is behind this sigil gate, so we'll need to pick up a dot sigil of entry to do this. Second, we want to close all of the anchors. Closing all of the anchors means traveling to these 5 different areas and making sure they are all closed. To do this, we'll need the password to Clarentevius's quarters. He's all too happy to tell us, but just in case we forget, or if we're not great with spelling, there are 2 different notes in his room that each have the password written down that we can bring with us. Completing these 2 tasks will allow us to board the Star Galley and leave the level. We can also kill Methats and bring his pauldron to Clarentevius. Doing this will give him a Ray of Hope, and net us the Typos Sophia, a staff that can cast a resistance to magic spell.
By the powers, you amaze me! Very well. Take the Typos Sophia. Much good may it do you in the colleges. But you shall see. Yes, you'll see soon enough. These creatures you see here are but pups compared with their masters. As you dangle for eternity in some Daedric pit of horrors, you'll wish you'd taken my advice and died gloriously with me in the ruins of Battlespire.
Once we have all of the gears, we can open the door to the Star Galley crib, which actually has another secret inside of it, but not one that's actually important to the game. This is the Mock Turtle. The Mock Turtle is an Easter egg and a fairly well-known reference to Alice in Wonderland. If you listen to his story, by which I mean read this wall of text, he tells you the answer to the riddle on the plaque near the teleporter. Answering it nets you a chest with some loot. With all that taken care of, we can finally step into the portal and leave the level. And here's where I want to stop for a bit. This video has gone for quite a long time, and we're still near the very beginning of the game, and that's not for no reason. We've discussed quite a bit of Battlespire, from a rather close look at character creation to how we're supposed to figure out what exactly it is we need to do and some of the bugs the game has. If this kind of old school dungeon crawling appeals to you, and you're not put off by Battlespire's admittedly many technical problems, then you'd probably enjoy experiencing the rest of the game for yourself relatively blind. I don't intend to spoil literally everything, but I will be talking a lot about puzzle solutions and other things that you might have more fun figuring out on your own. I know I did. So this is a big ol' spoiler warning for the rest of the game. Got it? Alright. Let's get into the second floor. Caitiff, Administration, Labs, and Library. The second floor of the Battlespire starts off with a massive battle with a ton of enemies. The first room took me a second attempt to get through. This room is a good example of why knowing what things do in this game can be very helpful, though it is extremely cryptic. The Typos Sophia, the staff we received from presenting Methats' pauldron to Clarentevius, has an enchantment on it that is extremely helpful. The enchantment is an activated effect that makes you extremely resistant to magical attacks. I don't know if it's actually total immunity, but it's pretty damn close if not. Not that you would know just from looking at it. Enchanted items and equipment in this game do not do a good job of telling you what they do. The Typos Sophia is just one example. Methats' pauldron is also magical, but do you have any idea what it does? Apparently it's a plus 15 to your swimming skill. Not entirely useless, I guess, but also why swimming? Did Mehrunes Dagon send the captain of the Daedra swim team? Is that who we killed on level 1? Regardless, this point extends to most of magical equipment. Some things can be sussed out, like lightness improving your jumping because it makes your body light, or airy gills giving you an on-use water-breathing effect. Then you have so many variations of these something silver wisdom, or something red wisdom. There's quite a few of them, and it's far from intuitive in my opinion. These effects always denote some kind of bonus to a magical school. Red is for destruction, green is for restoration, sure, those make sense. Golden is for alteration, and silver is for illusion. A little weirder, I guess. Unknown wisdom is mysticism? I suppose. Mysticism can be a bit esoteric, especially these days. But then unseen wisdom is thaumaturgy. But the only thing that illusion can even do is cast invisibility, so what the hell? Why isn't that one unseen? Thaumaturgy has monster summoning in it, so it's not even like, oh, all that school's spell effects are invisible to the naked eye, or anything like that. There's also a prefix that comes with most of these. So putting these together, a Noble Golden Wisdom item will give you a Cure Health spell while providing a bonus to your alteration skill. Fantastic! Now just memorize another couple hundred of items and their effects. Obviously, you don't actually have to memorize them all, but just having a decent idea of what exactly the equipment you have can do does wonders for making the game easier. This also gives you a really good reason to pick up weapons and equipment that you may have forbidden yourself from using. Yeah, you might not be able to equip that mace, but it has a healing spell, which means it's not totally useless to you. Unless you're looking everything up, the only way to find out what different enchantments do is to put things on and try them, or find an entry in a Codex Arcana or other similar scroll. There's quite a few of those around, but they don't document literally every item. There are quite a few items that simply never appear in these logs. There aren't that many items in Battlespire that are strictly negative. You won't run into any cursed items like you might in Baldur's Gate or something. Anything that you can put on, you can just as easily take off. So generally, experimentation is low risk. That said, if the spell you cast has some kind of continuous effect, then good luck figuring out what it is from the icon it gives you. Oh look, we finally finished killing everything in this room. If you didn't miss it in the commotion like I did, there's a note in this first room that gives you some idea of what's going on here. This note is, of course, from Josiah. He gives a brief overview of what he's doing and what he believes is going on. He's disguised himself so that he can hang around a Daedra called Sumir, who is supposed to be in charge around here. He also mentions the sigils again, in case you somehow missed that on the first floor. He also gives us another name. Paxty Bitter, who was apparently a master of teleportation and void gates, is the traitor who let Mehrunes Dagon in. We're told to search for codes, keys, clues, and weapons because Daedra security is pretty lax. Level 2 is interesting because it's the only level that's split into two distinct parts. You don't get a level up between them, but once you proceed to the second part, there's no real way back to the first. Our objective in this first half is to find a piece of the Void Guide and give it to this character.
Hello, little manling. My name is Rishal.
Rishal is the one in charge of the scamps around here. She won't let us into the secret parts of the Battlespire until we help her out. So let's get searching. Finding the Void Guide isn't that hard, but it does require a bit of a keen eye. First, we're going to find this secret room by activating a secret switch. Defeating the Spider Daedra within gives us a Met Sigil of entry. Then we can fight our way down to this room, which requires the aforementioned sigil to get past. You are supposed to be able to speak with the Dremora in here, but I just killed him. This room has a funny prank in it. In order to get the Void Guide, you need to activate this lever. This lever, however, will hurt you if you use it. There's no indication that this is the case, and there's no way to avoid the damage. So I guess it's a good rule of thumb to just be at full health when you interact with stuff from now on. The good news is once we've opened it, the Void Guide is ours, and we can give it to Rishal.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
She'll hand us a Zur Sigil of Entry, and we can open the door to the second half. This Sigil of Entry is necessary to get to the teleporter, but there's also another area in this section that we can use it. This is another place that has a secret button to press, which will open up even more equipment for us. There's actually one more that requires a rote Sigil of Entry, but I fucked up the conversation with the NPC that gives it to you. Oh well.
Really? How nice.
The secret switches and rooms are why I ended up comparing this game more to System Shock than to other Elder Scrolls games. Alright, so for the second half of level 2, we have to find more pieces of the Void Guide. There's more to it than just that, obviously. Firstly, we know we need to be on the lookout for secret areas and the like. This is a good time to mention that you can interact with weapons that seem to be hung up as display pieces. Remember how you can still use the magical aspects of weapons even if you can't equip them? That means that if nothing else, it's worth checking out the enchantments on pretty much anything you come across. This should, hopefully, lead to you touching this mace above the door. Doing so will open a secret room that leads us to the Mace Scourge, the very same that you can run into in Morrowind and Skyrim. Here, it's going to help us get a piece of the Void Guide. If you happen to be a blunt weapon user, it's the only weapon in the whole game that has infinite durability, presumably because it's a quest objective. Then, across this hallway, we have a library of sorts. This is where we're going to pick up the second half of our quest objective, the keyword keyword to activate Scourge. Here we're going to pick up a couple of extra scrolls. I'm not actually sure if we need to pick them up, but we do at least need to read them. While we're in here, there's a Dremora we can speak to, who is not hostile. He will appear to offer us a deal, but we really don't have any say in the matter.
Your agreement is of little account in this. We do as we will. Finally, I have prepared a few notes for your review that may make things a bit clearer. Will you take them from my own hand?
This guy works for someone fairly high up the food chain, but exactly who or why is unclear at the moment. Make sure to keep him in mind for later. After our little conversation, he leaves us with a note that explains a little bit about Daedra politics and philosophy. I found this to be a very interesting read, particularly the last section about man's mystery. The big thing for us to note, however, is that Daedra serve their lords because of an oath, not because of any magical compulsion. That means they are capable of betrayal. Continuing on, we push up the stairs and to the right toward the room with Sumir. Off to this side room, we find a piece of the Void Guide. This piece is just sitting on a table, easy enough to find. Once we kill Sumir's bodyguards, we can speak with him. He threatens to sick his bodyguards on us again. Lucky for us, he's by himself. Unfortunately, I can't punish him for his hubris, and instead have to settle on being satisfied with promising to find the pieces of the Void Guide for him. Then we head to the other side of the stairs room and make our way down a long, winding hallway. Once we find a footlocker that we can move, we have our second piece of the Void Guide. Continuing further down the hallway, we eventually have to take out some Spider Daedra, who we loot a web sigil of entry from. This leads us to a room with a big table in the middle. These last two Spider Daedra prove to be rather difficult to defeat, but they go down all the same. This allows us to speak with one Shana Carriane, who wants Scourge, that mace we picked up. Lucky for us, we already have both the mace and the keyword to use it. We do our little handoff with her, and as she activates Scourge, she is swept away into oblivion.
Scourge, I invoke thee in the name of equality. Yes. And with this power, I may now rid myself of your irksome stink. But what? Oh! Ah, God!
Yeah, Daedra aren't supposed to be able to use this thing, Bethesda! Anyway, that's 3 pieces of the Void Guide acquired. The last one is in yet another secret room that we can identify by looking at the map, similar to Clarentavius' room. Here, we find some scamps who are guarding the last piece. Awesome. Now let's put these in the device and move on to the 3rd floor. Welcome to the Soul Cairn. Odds are, you've been here. If you've played Elder Scrolls, there's good odds you've played Skyrim. If you played Skyrim, you probably went through Dawnguard at least once. The Soul Cairn made its first appearance here, in Battlespire. What do you mean you don't recognize it? It's the same place. Okay, jokes aside, it's obviously very different. I actually find this version much easier to navigate than Skyrim's for one thing, but that's probably just because it's not a huge gray desert. Once again, we have to figure out where the hell we're going. After dispatching some enemies in the first room, we read another note from Josian. Josian warns us not to mess with the Wraiths as they can't be killed. He's right too. You can smack these motherfuckers for a long time. They are technically killable, but they have a wounds value of 2,000, so it will take a long frickin' time to do even one, let alone the 27 that are on this level. No, instead there is a far easier way to get them that we'll talk about later. The note also mentions that our next stop is someplace called Shade Perilous. This will be important to remember for the end of the level. Once we kill a few enemies and make our way to this hallway, we can read all of these little plaques. One of them has all the answers to some riddles we're going to run into later. This isn't the first time the game has done this, but it's a decision I kind of appreciate, because it means that even if you can't solve the riddle yourself, it gives you a way to answer them correctly without resorting starting to looking things up. One of the wraiths we can run into is the Wraith of Kiralaman, who we can turn into a crystal. I think it's supposed to be enchanted with something, but I wasn't able to pick it up. So this guy's sacrifice is going to be a bit of a waste, I think. A little more exploring, and we have to go underwater for the first time. In this pool, we find a wheel that you technically don't need to turn, but it does make life a little easier. Then we have a problem. We cannot surface. We're carrying too much stuff. I don't know exactly what the cutoff is, but if you're carrying too much, you aren't able to surface in the water. Generally, I find that dropping items until you're carrying around 2/3 your maximum capacity is enough. If you're smarter than me though, you'll do it before you jump into the water, so that you can retrieve the items again later. Nothing to worry about though. We have potions that give us temporary water breathing, so we have plenty of time to figure out where we're going and how to escape the water. Once we make our way through this underwater cave, we find this courtyard that seems to have a piece of the land ripped off it and floating above. This is because of that wheel we touched earlier. Taking the elevator up to these wheels, this Morphoid Oathkin is carrying a sigil of entry that we need.
I hear you are quite the little fireball. They say for us to capture you alive. I tend to get excited in a fight, so please remind me about the alive part if I seem to get too excited.
So of course we dispatch him. This sigil allows us to explore these side passages, where we can find a couple of secret compartments. One of the scrolls we can find is the Book of Life and Service. This book has different names for the denizens we run into here. The Daedra we run into are not noted because Mehrunes Dagon is an invader, and the Daedra are not native to the Soulcairn. The book calls the enemies Mistmen, Bonemen, and Wrathmen. It also notes the Masters, who supposedly bridge the past and span the future. This is all cool, but it's mostly world building and doesn't actually help us achieve our goal of escaping this place. Returning to the wheels, spinning each of them lifts more sections of the earth up and creates a small bridge for us to jump across. I want to talk a bit about this game's platforming. There's not a hell of a lot of it, but there's enough that it warrants discussion. Technically, there were sections in the previous levels that had this as well. Now, opinions on first-person platforming tend to be kind of divided from what I've seen, but I don't think anyone will argue if I say it's a bit janky in Battlespire. A lot of people seem to really dislike the jump indicator. Personally, I think it's very useful. It indicates two different distances, one for if you're moving and one for if you're standing still. If you're moving, you can jump way further. This is helpful because your jumping skill can increase throughout the game, so your jump distance isn't static. You can't just learn to judge how far you'll jump, because eventually you'll start overshooting. The biggest problem I ran into is just being impatient and wanting to jump too soon, which leads to undershooting and sometimes landing on corners and getting killed as a result. That said, the skill's inclusion at all could be argued as a bad idea. Personally though, I enjoy it. It's one of the things that this game has that you can try to use to sequence break, and between the athleticism advantage and jumping potions, you can make some serious distance if you try. Once we've crossed that little section, there's a set of stairs leading down to a dock with a single boat on it. Now, don't be too shocked when I tell you that this game lets you drive the boat. Taking the boat to the other side of the cave, we find a dock with a wraith on it. This area is actually more relevant because it has the wraith of Paxti Bitter, that traitor that let Mehrunes Dagon in and doomed the Battlespire. Paxti has some dialogue explaining what he did and why. He also makes reference to Jaeger Tharn and his retainer, Siranungada. It's an interesting conversation, but ultimately tells the tale of a traitor who got what was coming to him. In a chest on this dock, there's another sigil of entry that I will totally forget to grab on my first sweep through this area. There's also a tunnel under the water that we'll return to in a bit. For now, we'll return to the dock with the stairs and push through until we find some coffins. These coffins have riddles on them, the answers to which we've already mentioned are written down in the hallway. Answering them correctly opens the coffins that have a little loot and these purple crystals. The crystals are the ideal masters.
Who disturbs our rest?
They are the rulers of this place, and as far as they're concerned, If we're not offering to become their undead servant, they aren't interested in helping us. All but one of them anyway. The last one will tell us about these rods and how we can use them to escape this place. This is when I realized I had missed the sigil and had to return to the docks. When grabbing it, I also got this book, the Book of Rest and Endings. With this book, we can permanently get rid of the wraiths by speaking to them and reciting an incantation. So now we know how to escape. All we have to do is put the rods in place and speak the name of the place we want to go. Now, who remembers the name? Hope you got it right, because error is fatal, apparently. Luckily for me, I brought the note from the beginning so that I can make sure that I don't misspell Shade Perilous. Shade Perilous is an interesting level. It's actually the only level I would say feels unreasonably difficult. When looking for mentions of Battlespire's difficulty in contemporary reviews, it was called out for being where the game's difficulty spike lies, and I'd say that I agree with that assessment. Notably though, that was pretty much the only mention of difficulty. In more modern reviews, Battlespire's difficulty seems to be a popular topic, but personally, I think this is overblown. Saving relatively often and actually interacting with the class creator makes most of Battlespire very manageable. Will it be easier if you use some kind of optimized build? Absolutely. Of course. Is it necessary to enjoy playing the game? Not even a little. But enough complaining. What are we doing here? Shade Perilous is a part of the Realm of Oblivion belonging to Nocturnal. We picked up a note on the last floor that questions why this might be the case, because apparently Mehrunes Dagon and Nocturnal hate each other. We get our answer shortly after entering. Mehrunes Dagon has invaded this area as well. We can speak with the Frost and Fire Daedra in the first room. They're not allowed to directly fight each other, but they are allowed to help us kill the other. Speaking with a Frost Daedra can reward us with an item to give us resistance to fire, and conversely, a Fire Daedra can reward us with a resistance to frost item. This would be fantastic, except resistance to fire is totally bugged in this game and never works. Not just these items, but any instance that says resistance to fire. Immunity works, but simple resistance does not. We also learn a few important names. Zivalai Moath, who is in charge of the Frost Daedra, Phaedra Shardai, who is in charge of the Fire Daedra, and Imago Storm, who seems to be in charge of the Dremora, who are mostly absent in this level. We also start running into Seducers and Dark Seducers, who we eventually learn are lordless, meaning their alliances shift. Our objective on this level is to free JCL Morgan, but doing this is not going to be easy. As usual, there's a laundry list of prerequisites in order to achieve this goal. The gist of this list is given to us by Deianira Catrice, who herself is blocked off by a door that requires a password. The password is easy enough to learn if you speak with enough Fire Daedra. We can also find a note on a corpse that has the password on it. This note is signed by Josian, and an earlier note had indicated that he wasn't doing so hot, so this may be the end of our partner's story. Deianira gives us a quick rundown of what happened here. Basically, Mehrunes Dagon convinced the Seducers to work for him, and they betrayed Nocturnal and captured JCL Morgan. Deianira tells us about 4 levers that we need to pull in order to open the path to JCL.
And the 4 secret levers are known to me only by word and not by deed.
So she gives us a description of them, and we're sent to find out where they are. The easiest one is right in front of her, under the table. The second is guarded by a Fire Daedra, who has a sigil of entry that leads to the Hand of Kindness, and a scroll called the Book of the Wheels of Heaven, which gives us another code. Then I got stuck at this part for a good long while. This little island here took me quite a long time to get past on both my first playthrough and this one. This area is difficult because of a combination of Dark Seducers being terrifying both with magic and with melee, and the fact that there are fucking 4 of them. This many enemies in this janky of an engine on this perilous terrain is a recipe for disaster. The regular seducers are actually quite manageable on their own, but the 6v1 is a little rough. Here's the good news though, you don't actually have to fight them. Your only reward for doing so is whatever they happen to drop, which, while tempting, is far from necessary to beat the level. I ended up running past them and into this potion storage area, where I looted as much stuff as I could dream up a use for. Also, the third lever is in here. Back near where I pulled the second lever, there's an area that has 2 fire daedra. One of these fire daedra has another sigil of entry that leads us to a teleporter. This teleporter is very important because it eventually leads us to the Wheels of Heaven. Of course, there's another sigil of entry before then, given to us by our mysterious benefactor who we first met in the library. We're apparently very predictable. The wheels require us to enter the code we were given in the book to open them up. Then we can spin the wheels to open the path to the final lever, which in turn opens up where JCL is being held captive.
Catch your tears in a sieve of gold, mortal. It's too late for weeping. I have no tears left, and no pity for the tears of mortals.
JCL is being a dick and doesn't want to help us escape. Our dialogue gives us a pretty big hint to go back and speak with Deianira again. She asks us to kill her, because that'll convince JCL to help us.
I implore you, you must do the deed. Take this soul dagger. If you strike true, you shall loosen my spirit and darkness will swallow me. Into the dagger I shall pour my hope and longings, which you must bear as a token to my mistress, that she will know what I have done for her.
Okay, if you say so. Miraculously, this plan works, and we're given the password to escape this place.
Ah, she is gone. Gone! I should tear your beating heart out and force you to eat it in tiny bites, one wriggling, beating bite each century. I should flay the skin from your body and hurl your living carcass into the sea of my salty tears. To the north is a door. Say, Gemaque, to enter.
We're also warned that we won't be able to go wherever we want, as Dagon has taken the portal and we have no control over our destination. Shucks. Finally, we're told that we can call on her to help us when we go to defeat Dagon.
Your cunning shines with a brightness that craves requiting. In the brightest light or blackest dark, we are equally blind. It may be that I owe you something, or owe it to myself and my pride. But if in the end you must stand before Dagon, call on me. I will use you as a link for travel, and it may be that even my modest powers can be one of your little surprises for him.
The intended path for this last area has us touching this torch before making our way to the portal. It is technically possible to do without it, but you need to have a really high jumping skill, as well as probably needing the athleticism perk. If you touch the torch too early though, the bridge it creates might disappear, potentially soft-locking you if you don't have the aforementioned jumping skill and athleticism. So be careful, okay? Once we speak the password at the portal, we're greeted by another Dremora, who informs us that Mehrunes Dagon has taken our friend.
Once again, you exceed our expectations. We did not expect you to find JCL. We Daedra have a standard joke about news, that there is no good news without bad news. So, the bad news is that Dagon has your companion.
He's not dead after all, but he won't be around to offer us any helpful advice. We're told that we're going to be hunted in a ritual at our destination. We can confront this Dremora about working for Imago Storm, and accuse him of trying to raise himself above Mehrunes Dagon.
Nonsense. There are none more loyal to Dagon as Imago Storm and all the Dremora clan. We simply hope to expedite the Battlespire campaign with as little disorder and unwarranted risk as possible.
This little thread is left unfinished for now. Imago has some plan for us, some greater purpose. All we understand is that he wants to help us, for reasons that we don't actually understand yet. Once we have our little conversation, we can then press on through the teleporter, which brings us to the last room. Here, I decided to say fuck the enemies and dive right into the well, teleporting us to the next area. The Chimera of Devastation is both the best and the worst of Battlespire all in one. It is the best because it has some of the most interesting characters, most fascinating lore, and my personal favorite puzzle in the whole game. It is also the worst because this is the level that can potentially brick your save. Basically, when you die in this game, and it does its little reset thing, when you load back into the level, there's some junk data that gets loaded as well. The amount of junk data increases with every death and reload, and puts your save at serious risk of becoming unusable. The workaround to this, if you happen to die, is to reload a save on a previous floor before loading your actual one. I did not do this for this playthrough, primarily because I was curious if it was necessary. At least in my case, it wasn't. This level starts us off on a dock. There are 2 notes here and a dark seducer who will speak with us. Imago Storm's informant has left a note here, and they seem to have a surprisingly high level of confidence in our ability to escape this place. The gist is this: we are being hunted as part of the Ritual of the Innocent Quarry. The Hunter is immune to all attacks and magic. This role is fulfilled by these guys. These are Daedra known as Herns. We take the role of the Hare, and have to evade the Hunter's spear. We technically have an escape, per the rules of the ritual, but what exactly that is isn't revealed to us immediately. The main thing that people might recognize from this level is the Savior's Hide. The Savior's Hide is a full set of equipment in this game, rather than just a chest piece like its later appearances. We'll get to why the armor is significant later. If you kill enough Frost and Fire Daedra, who, for the ritual, take the roles of Lesser and Greater Hounds, you will find the official rules for the hunt. This is how we learn about these roles and the fact that we have to collect 6 keys. These keys are our ticket out of here. The first 5 exist out in the world and are retrievable in the typical fashion. Find a place of interest, enter it, retrieve our reward. When we enter this green crystal building, we find a few things. A key, as expected, a spear case, and a letter that says one of the keys is being held by the Hunter. Hunter Egahirn is apparently breaking the rules, as if he's holding the key, there's no chance that the Hare could escape, is there? Not quite true, as it would turn out. While exploring the island, we meet a man named Kemir, who was cursed by Dagon. Kemir is a crazy old man who actually succeeded in tricking Dagon, though it cost him everything. He has quite a lot of dialogue and is our primary source for information on this level. He does have 2 nonsense quests that serve as red herrings.
What a relief ye be, human. Perhaps ye can be of assistance to old man Kemir. I have lost something, and I cannot find it. With me arthritis, I cannot go looking for what I have lost. I've lost me thingy.
But once he comes to his senses, he can help quite a bit. It turns out that what we have to do is assemble all the pieces of the Savior's Hide, so that we can wield the Spear of Bitter Mercy, another artifact you might recognize. We can then use the spear to defeat the Hunter and escape the ritual. Kemir gives us a note that tells us where the pieces of the armor lie. In addition, he is the only one who can open the spear case, though he will only do that once we have the armor. So let's get searching for it. One piece is directly under the dock we started from. A few are in temples around the island. One of them is inside this waterfall, and is protected by many dark seducers. Finally, there are 2 in the final area of the level, but how do we reach it? For that, we fly a hot air balloon. That's right, not only do we have the ability to drive boats, but we also get a hot air balloon. This is the easiest way to cross over to Granvalusa before we lower the drawbridge. On the cliffs here, we find another piece, and inside this building, we find the last. With the armor in hand, we can lower the drawbridge and return to Khmer. He will help us get the spear, and we can hunt the hunter. The whole time I'm doing this quest, I just imagine that my successful escape makes the ritual that much harder for any future heirs. My escape will prove that the hunters holding the keys doesn't actually make it impossible for the heir, which I can only imagine means that in the future, all of the hunters will be holding keys. After defeating the hunter, we do actually have the ability to return to the first little village and ring the town bell, mockingly completing the ritual. There's a lot of flavor on this level, and truthfully, I don't think I've conveyed it very well. The ritual of the hunt has a lot of fanfare about it, and seems to be very important to the Daedra. The hunter who was breaking the rules is a character all his own, and even if you don't spend much time talking to him, I feel like he's very interesting. Before we ever meet him, we learn that he's cheating in this ritualistic event that he supposedly can't even really fail. Even the other Daedra are questioning if his cheating is a good idea, as the letter we find shows us. Obviously, we know he's a cheater, but this shows an insecurity that isn't really demonstrated in any of the other characters in this game. All of the official documentation for this ritual makes it seem like the heir's chance of survival is so slim as to be practically impossible under normal circumstances. Holding the key personally to further complicate the matter ends up punishing Egahirn in a sort of ironic way. His cheating is exactly the reason he ends up getting killed, because if we'd been able to just loot the keys, we could have simply escaped. No spear, no armor, no nothing. This will be somewhat important for the last level as well, but we'll get there. The Savior's Hide also has a bit of an interesting quirk to it. In most iterations, the Savior's Hide is a light armor chest piece that grants a resistance to magic. In Battlespire, however, it's actually quite the opposite. First of all, each piece is not necessarily the same material as all the others. It can be anything from heavy Daedric armor with a high AC to a light iron armor with much less. This might initially sound like a problem. What if you restricted the armor or materials you were allowed to wear? Well, we're not able to wear Daedric armor according to our character sheet, but we can equip this Daedric cuirass just fine. Perhaps obviously, this armor, being important to progress the story, is exempt from any class restrictions. The only consistency between the pieces is the enchantments. This is also strange, because every single one makes you weaker to magical attacks. The helmet will stop you from regenerating spell points, and each of the other 5 pieces will give you a low tolerance to a different element. Why exactly this was changed in later iterations, I'm not really clear on. Finally is Khmer. Khmer himself is a very interesting character. He sought to drain Mehrunes Dagon of his power, and ended up getting everybody he loved killed as a result. He did this by finding out what Mehrunes Dagon's protonymic is. The protonymic is Dagon's real name. I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of a demon's real name giving you power over it, and this is the same thing. He has a diary sitting on his desk, an extremely long document that tells us basically everything we want to know about the man. He apparently learned Mehrunes Dagon's protonymic and used it to drain him of his power. Dagon, realizing what was happening, threw the rest of his power into cursing the man and throwing his entire hometown into oblivion. Speaking with Khmer, we can learn Dagon's protonymic, Lekelaga. Unfortunately, since Dagon was already defeated using his protonymic, he's since added a neonymic, which Khmer doesn't know. With all of this information in mind, we can move on to the penultimate level. The Havoc Wellhead is actually quite easy compared to the previous levels. The Herns, who were hunters on the Chimera of Devastation, are now killable via normal means, and since they don't cast spells, they're like slightly less dangerous Dramoras that we've been killing since the first floor. Once we've explored our way around the first area, we come to a massive door. Most of the doors we've opened use keys or a button someplace. This one, however, needs us to activate this tree so that we can knock it down and open the door that way. This leads us into a large courtyard, and oh my god, it's everybody's favorite Guardian of the Oblivion Gates, the Clanfear. These little dinosaur bastards are only on this floor. Surprisingly enough, just like every other enemy, we can talk to them, though they aren't particularly intelligent.
Smells the flesh. What does the flesh hear?
This courtyard has 3 sides that all ultimately lead to one of the lieutenants we spoke of earlier. Imago Storm is in the north, Zivalai Moath is in the east, and Phaedra Shardai is in the west. This level also introduces us to Lesser Lords. These are like the Daedra Lords you might find in Daggerfall. Like the Dark Seducers, they are extremely dangerous when casting spells. They have a tendency to simply machine gun out every spell they can before rushing you in melee. There does seem to be some kind of bug or something where they sometimes cast beneficial spells on you, and truthfully I'm not sure why. The spells are mostly harmful though, and they shoot so many so fast, so don't go counting on that to save you. Once we manage to clear the area out, we're faced with a decision of where to go. Strictly speaking, it doesn't matter, so let's just start by heading to the east. Opening the door, there's a few enemies, and a decent amount of secret walls that lead to extra loot. A lot of it, actually. Kinda too much, to be honest. Too much loot? In my action RPG? Well, not really too much loot per se, but definitely way too much messing around in your inventory. Alright, this is going to be my last rant about something in the game I dislike. Inventory management is fake. I'm sure you've seen it a few times by now, but this is what the inventory screen looks like. Everything takes up one slot, and there's no way to view more than these items at once. Inventory management in this game boils down to a couple of strategies. First, grab extra sacks and put items in those. I used this slot here to pick up all of the relevant scrolls that I find. Other than that, you're looking at a whole lot of here's my enchanted weapons, here's my enchanted armor. But the issues don't end there, oh no. How much stuff you can carry is determined by your strength stat, and each point is worth 2 pounds. Easy enough, right? Now how much stuff are you currently carrying? Well, you're not going to manually add them all up, are you? No, you don't have to do that, but what you do have to do is go to a completely different screen. Yeah, you can't see how much weight you're carrying unless you go to your character sheet. You know, where you can see your skills and shit. I wouldn't personally go so far as to say that managing your items is a headache, but it's definitely more cumbersome than it needs to be. Here's the thing, right? This is an issue that is shared with Daggerfall. Almost an identical problem. The difference is that in Daggerfall, you have options for relieving the weight you're carrying. You can put stuff in your wagon or sell it at shops, significantly reducing the weight of what you're carrying, at least for that dungeon. In Battlespire, you don't really have those moments. If you're holding on to something because you might want it for later, you're holding on to it pretty much forever. Hoarding potions and random loot is not actually necessary, but are you sure you want to drop that healing axe with 3 more uses? Sure, you've got 30 potions, but what if you need more? I think it's undeniable that dropping an item just to free up inventory space feels terrible, no matter what game it is. This problem is made even more difficult when you consider how you repair items. I mentioned it once near the very beginning that it's possible, and I'm honestly not sure where this might fit better. Every so often, when we've looted stuff, we've come across empty boxes. If you don't know to check, odds are you would have missed these on your first playthrough. You can actually select the section above the normal inventory and pick up whole boxes. Most of the time, this is only useful for the pseudo-inventory management I talked about before. When you check the names of some of these empty boxes, they might be coffers of restoration. These boxes are one-time use. When you put an item that has been damaged into one of these coffers, it will be repaired, letting you reuse enchantments or extend the lifetime of items you're not quite ready to part with. This is why we've been able to hold on to the Typo Sophia this whole time. Take care though, the name of the coffer will not change even after you've used it, but it will become useless after that point. Enough about inventory though. We've come to yet another familiar name. Zivalai Moath was the leader of the Frost Daedra on Shade Perilous, though he didn't make an actual appearance on the level. We can treat with him to return ourselves and our partner back to Tamriel.
You overestimate the inconvenience you have caused me, and overvalue your status in negotiations with an immortal lord.
But he won't help us, yet. We apparently haven't caused him enough trouble, it seems. We'll get his cooperation one way or another. Further exploring the eastern wing, we come to this room, which appears to be an observatory or something. This is Siren Ungada. I mentioned his name exactly once before, so don't worry if you can't remember. This is Jagar Tharn's retainer. If you don't know who that is, basically, he's posing as the Emperor Uriel Septim, effectively usurping the Empire. The events of Battlespire occur during the game Arena, and if you don't know what happens during that game, they're not really important right now. The long and short of it is that Siren Ungada is evil and works for the big bad evil guy of the first game. We can spend some time talking to him. He seems to be agitated and wants to speak to Lord Dagon so that he can report some dire portent that he's read in the Magicka. We can play along a bit, but this conversation is actually quite interesting for reasons that we'll get into when we discuss Imago Storm. Once we finish with that conversation, we can explore the barracks. If you play this game, make sure to save down here before getting on the elevator. This elevator cannot be called from below, so make sure you clear the third floor before the second, or you'll lose access to this elevator forever. Once that's done, we can move to the west. The western section of this level has a bit of a gimmick. After clearing out the first section of it, we come to these mirrors. Each one will teleport us to a different location. The mirror on the right will take us to this testing chamber of sorts. Not a typical one though. You see, each of these trapdoors leads us to a pit of water, and if you can't swim, you will drown. Not that it much matters since there's no escape anyway. The note you can find on the wall reads as follows. Dear occupant, we regret to inform you that you have failed your preliminary intelligence examination. Only a real dope would dive into a deep hole without arranging for a teleport anchor. Have a nice day, or two. I personally found this hilarious, especially since the labels outside each hole say intelligence training. Luckily, I did set a teleport anchor, and can escape without issue. Returning to the small portal hub, we can enter the next area, which is mostly inconsequential. It has an arena of sorts and a decent number of enemies, but nothing that I found is super interesting. The last one takes us to our other leader, Phaedra Shardai. Phaedra was the leader of the Fire Daedra on Shade Perilous. And boy, can you tell.
That does not please me. I have told you to swear to my service. Now do it, or you will make your lady very, very angry.
If you ask her to help you get back to Tamriel, she explains that she's generous to her servants. You actually get the opportunity to pledge yourself to serve her, and if you do, it kills you. Neat. Another Daedra lieutenant who isn't going to be helpful. Guess we're going to have to figure something else out. Finally, we come to the last section. The door to the north of the map is opened by activating this golden drum kit. The courtyard has a few enemies, but other than that, this place seems impenetrable. The massive gate doesn't have any obvious openings. That's because you just touch this wall on the left. I have no idea how this was supposed to be figured out, to be honest. It's technically possible to enter just by sneaking up close to the door, but I didn't do that this time. Inside, we have a couple of lesser lords to contend with, but ultimately we can handle that. Getting into the elevator blocked off by a sigil of entry, we make our way up to meet Imago Storm. We've got some questions for him, and oh boy does he have answers. We can ask about what he stands to gain by helping us, Daedra politics, why he's subverting Mehrunes Dagon, and even why Daedra cared to interact with mortals in the first place. One of the most interesting answers is his explanation about what each of these Daedra represent. For this to make sense, you need to understand that Mehrunes Dagon is the Daedric Prince of Destruction. He's got a few other things tied to that as well, but destruction is first and foremost. Imago explains that Phaedra Shardai represents the impulsive and undisciplined elements of destruction. Zivalai represents the ambitious but overreaching side. Imago himself says he represents the principle of destruction as evolution. Of particular interest here is the ambitious but overreaching side of destruction. When we ask if he's trying to supplant Dagon, he denies it, and says that his interest lies purely on the welfare of the clan. Then, when we ask why he's trying to help us, and consequently foil Mehrunes Dagon's plans, he tells us it's because they've overreached, and don't have the resources to actually hold all the territory they've acquired. He also says,
"A time of change is coming. It is written in the firmament."
This lines up extremely well with what Siren Ungado was speaking of as well. What Siren portended was a disaster, presumably for Lord Dagon, who he was trying to warn. During this time, Imago says they will not need other distractions, and so he has a proposal for us. His proposal is as follows.
Here's my proposal. I will give you the neonymics of Phaedra, Zivalai, and Lord Dagon. You will use those neonymics to cast them into oblivion for the present. For reward, you shall have your life, and the life of your companion. When Dagon is cast into the void, you may take his amulet of entry, pass into the ward sigil that hangs in his sanctuary, and thus be teleported back to Battlespire, where you may pass through his sigil there and return to Tamriel. Does that satisfy you?
He will tell us the neonymics of Phaedra, Zivalai, and Lord Dagon, and hand us the first of 3 keys. The other keys are held by Phaedra and Zivalai. In return, we are to use these tools to cast all 3 into oblivion, and in return, he promises we and our companion will be able to return to Tamriel. The reason I appreciate Imago's task so much is because it represents the fulfillment of his role of evolution. Zivalai and Phaedra have indulged Dagon in pressing too far, too fast during the Battlespire campaign. Imago, realizing this, knows things must change. So what does he do? He destroys those aspects which endanger the clan, ultimately strengthening it by removing the currently exposed weaknesses. I find this whole thing extremely satisfying. Each one fulfills their role to a T. Now, Daedra don't really die in the traditional sense. When we cast Daedra into oblivion, they are basically made incorporeal for an unspecified period of time. Even using their neonymics, we won't be permanently killing either Phaedra or Zivalai. Imago describes it as analogous to sleep, something that immortal beings do not do. This doesn't stop it from being very unpleasant though. We can banish Phaedra and convince Zivalai to help us by threatening him, resulting in all 3 keys collected. On our way back to put the keys in, the game crashes. I'm pretty sure it crashed in the same spot the first time I played as well. Not sure what causes it, but saving after I get the last key seems to stop it from happening. When we return to the room where we met Imago, we can insert the keys and press on to the final level. Here it is, the ultimate challenge, the final level of the game. It's also the shortest by a pretty significant margin. That said, it's also filled with all the most dangerous enemies. We've encountered most of them before. In addition to the Wraiths, who are now more reasonable to kill, Dark Seducers and Daedra Lords are also present. We start off, as usual, with a note near the entrance. This is the last bit of help we're going to be getting. It tells us first of a few items to keep an eye out for. These are unimportant, but they are powerful. The important thing that this tells us about is the Sword of the Moon Reaver, a unique sword forged from Dagon's own substance. This is going to be the only detour we have to make. The rest of this note is basically a word of encouragement, and a reminder that basically says, I sure hope you kept the armor of the Savior's hide. Don't worry, this one's not as bad as it sounds. So all we have to do is make our way around these thin pathways suspended over a burning pit of lava. Easy money, right? But where, oh where, is the Sword of the Moon Reaver? The answer is actually right here. That dark seducer in the distance is our target. We need to find a way to get to her, but there's no direct path across. Unless, of course, you recall how we opened the door to the courtyard in the Havoc Wellhead. That's right, we have to knock over this giant tree and march across. I had a lot of trouble getting onto this thing for some reason. As we're trying to cross, the Daedra Lords will cast spells and try to knock us off. If we fall into the lava, we're basically just dead. It is technically possible to return where we started, as there's a small path up there, but without immunity to fire, we're going to be hard-pressed to survive long enough to make it. Eventually, we manage to make it across and take out the Daedra Lords guarding the Dark Seducer, who we actually want to get to. Speaking with her, she will ask us to leave her alone, but unfortunately that's not a real option for us. I'm not sure if it's because of the dialogue options we chose or because her AI bugged out, but she wouldn't raise a finger to defend herself as we slew her and took the blade. Now all that's left is to get to Dagon. We can continue our way around until we find this giant ballista. Normally, you would touch the ballista and it would teleport you up onto the rocks. However, I was using some enchanted equipment and decided it would be funnier to just jump up. Along this mountain path, there are yet more enemies, including a Wraith who is the only enemy that is actually 100% unkillable. This Wraith is one that you can speak to. If you foolishly discarded your Armor of the Savior's hide, he will apparently give it back to you. I don't need this, but it's good to have the option. Ascending the mountain, we'll see why I held on to the Typo Sophia so long. There are so many of these Daedra Lords up here. We need to kill at least one to get its sigil of entry so that we can enter the hunting lodge proper. There are so many of them and so many spells that they end up killing a few of their own in the crossfire, letting us grab one quickly and steal away inside. Not that we have much time to relax here, as there are multiple enemies who will continue their assault. From here, the plan is basically to let the enemies spend all of their spell points and try to take them out in melee. The Typo Sophia makes the first part relatively easy, but these are still endgame enemies, so we still need to make sure we're careful. We do have 40 potions in storage, just in case, but we're not going to be needing all of those. Each section of the lodge is pretty short, and only requires that you kill a few enemies. When we finally clear the final room, we gird ourselves with the armor of the Savior's hide, our Sword of the Moon Reaver, and step into the final room. Here we have a conversation with Mehrunes Dagon. We tell him we know his real name.
Well, I must say, I am impressed.
Then we tell him we know his full real name, and he's upset at this.
What? Why, you arrogant little bug. You think you can suck the power from me and cast me into oblivion?
Then we tell him about the sword we have, and he's clearly quite distressed.
1,000 curses! You are right, mortal. I have been a fool. Mistakes have been made, but no more. You will die now, before more mistakes are made.
Finally, we call upon JCL Morgan to give us that extra second to cast Mehrunes Dagon into oblivion and strike him with a weapon of his own essence, defeating him. From here, a cutscene plays that shows Mehrunes Dagon's defeat, our hero saving their friend and returning to Tamriel. Meanwhile, the entire hunting lodge is destroyed and crumbles without its connection to Mehrunes Dagon. I think the cutscene is pretty cool, but why does the game immediately close after it finishes? It feels feels like there's supposed to be some kind of ending narration, bookending it like the beginning, but it just closes like it's crashing or something. It's quite baffling, to be honest, but I suppose now that the game's done, I should also come to some conclusions myself. An Elder Scrolls Legend Battlespire is my pick for the most surprising game in the series. It's not some forgotten masterpiece, overlooked in its time by people who didn't understand it. It's a very flawed game, from weird audio issues to enemies getting stuck in walls, and even the occasional game crash. These are just the technical issues that are all but inarguably not intended parts of the experience. This doesn't account for things that could be argued as matters of taste, the inventory system showing so few items at once, the enchantments on items being cryptic at best, especially when a description of it doesn't exist in the game. Even the very premise of the game is questionable to some. It's not an open world, and it focuses on combat in a series that is more renowned for its open world elements and focus on freedom. Beneath all of that, though, is a wonderfully complex class creation system that offers plenty of opportunity to express knowledge of the game, levels that I found extremely satisfying to puzzle my way through and eventually overcome the challenges within. Characters that I find compelling and interesting, even with the limited interactions we have with them. A classic story where the evil is defeated, the hero saves the day, and gets to return home to a world that is just a little better off than it was before. Battlespire might not be some overlooked masterpiece, or have any genre or technology-defining innovations. Its flaws may hold it back from ever becoming widely recognized as a cult classic. That's not going to stop me from enjoying the game for what it is. It's not my favorite game ever. It's a game that I like, that I think gets more shit than it deserves. As far as I'm aware, there aren't any revival projects working to fix Battlespire's issues. Daggerfall has Daggerfall Unity, which is feature complete. Redguard and Arena have their own projects that are still far from complete, but are well underway. Battlespire, I think, would benefit immensely from a similar project, but whether that'll ever happen, I'm not sure. I hope I could share a bit of why I like Battlespire with you. I said in the beginning I didn't want to downplay its flaws too much, and this game is very flawed, but I don't think it deserves the negative reputation that it has. In reality, I don't think it's much harder to play than Daggerfall, and it's not nearly as prone to crashing as the copy of Redguard that I played on Steam. It's a fun, if short, game that I think slots in nicely with the rest of the Elder Scrolls universe. It forms a sort of trilogy with Arena and Oblivion, whose stories it is most interconnected with. A hearty recommendation from me if you're willing to put up with some technical difficulties in addition to your classic old game jank. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe to help the channel grow. It's no exaggeration to say this was about twice as much work as I had initially expected, hence why it's coming out a full month later than I wanted. Hopefully the quality makes up for the quantity. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day.